Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to Momming with Migraine, where today we are not going to talk about either of those things. Today we're going to talk about the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages of doing an epidural blood patch versus doing an epidural fibrin patch, the Fibrin Glue, from a patient's perspective. At the end of this video, I'm not going to be able to tell you this one is better, this is what you should choose, this one is absolutely the right choice. Because frankly, there is no right choice. There's no one right answer when it comes to doing the blood versus doing the glue. There's only a bunch of weighing. There's a time and a place for each, and it depends on the doctor, the patient, and the circumstances. Like I said before, I'm going to be sharing from my patient's perspective. I have done some research on it, so I know a little bit of background about each of the different types of glue, whether it be blood or actual glue. So I'll share some stuff that I've read up on, but I'm also going to share uniquely from the patient perspective what it actually felt like to get each of these injected into my epidural space. And I'm also going to tell you about the recovery from each of them, because they differ. But keep in mind, I've only had one of each, so each of my experiences may have been an anomaly. And even if mine weren't an anomaly, yours might be an anomaly. So always take these things with a grain of salt. And although I can't tell you what the right decision is, I sincerely hope that my efforts are helping you make the right decision for you if you're being faced with this decision. The idea behind both of these procedures is exactly the same. That brain fluid is leaking out from somewhere, and whether you know where it is or not, you're injecting that blood or that fibrin glue to try to seal the hole or stop the leak. My pre-op instructions for both types of patch were exactly the same. The procedure itself for both types of patch was also executed almost exactly the same way. But there are some big differences in the properties of the two materials themselves. Oh, excuse me, still getting over this cold. And those slight differences in the properties of the materials is what cascades the differences both during the procedure and in the recovery. So let's talk about the goop, the blood versus the glue. But before we get to that, we have to talk about where it's going. So your brain is floating in a fluid-filled sac called the dura. The dura goes all the way around your brain and it goes down in your spinal column. That's also called your thecal sac. And outside of that is called your epidural space. And then that's surrounded by, I don't know, I have no idea. But the problem is that the fluid inside that sac is leaking. So what we're doing is we're going in either with blood or with fibrin glue, and we are injecting that goop into the epidural space that is outside of the bag of fluid that we're trying to seal. So we are not putting blood into the brain fluid sac. We're putting it right outside of it and hoping that the blood is strong enough, thick enough, applying enough pressure, and has enough clotting factors and yummy clotty goodness to actually seal those holes. The epidural space itself is not actually a space. It's not air. It is a lightly fatty space. But that is all I can tell you because I've never been in anybody's epidural space. Kind of makes me think of SpongeBob. You know how he draws his friends and he's like, the gang's all here. I'm alone in my office arranging my friends. This is pathetic. We all know what blood is like. It's sort of puddingy, but it's actually pretty loose. It's actually pretty liquid. And if you imagine injecting that into a space that's described as lightly fatty, you might be able to have some little picture in your mind of what that might look like. I've heard that when a doctor injects a high volume of blood into the epidural space, they can usually get that blood to spread about 4 levels of spine. But after that, there's just too much pressure on the brainstem, it's too much on the patient, and that's all the spreading that you're able to get. In my eyes, that seems like a lot of spreading. Blood actually is the more spreadable of the two, and it makes blood a really good candidate for doing a non-targeted patch. You see, if you don't know exactly where your hole is, then it's a really good call to use a material that will spread as far as possible and hopefully hit as many areas of that dura as possible. It can be a strategic thing to choose the blood over choosing the fibrin patch, specifically because it will spread in a way that the fibrin glue cannot. And what that means for the fibrin glue is that it's more sticky, more viscous, more like honey. So when it gets injected into the epidural space, it's more difficult to push it in, and it's more difficult to get it to spread. And from what I've read, most doctors only get to about 1 or 2 levels of vertebrae when they go in with the fibrin glue. Just a little reminder that I'm only a patient. I'm not a doctor, I'm not medically trained. I'm someone who is going through this, and I'm reading on the forums, I'm reading in the literature, I'm asking my doctor, but I can't guarantee that any of this information is right. You guys, we are on the cutting edge of technology with this leak stuff and with CSF venous fistulas. This stuff is brand stinking new. And as much as I think that me and my doctor are keeping up with the times, you just never know what information is going to keep coming out. I encourage you to do your own research and talk to your own doctor. Do know that I am trying to do my due diligence, but I can't make any guarantees. During patching procedures, you are awake. You do get twilight sedation, but you are awake. So you can feel it when this stuff is entering your epidural space. I remember during my first non-targeted blood patch, it was a high volume of blood going in, and I actually felt the warm sensation of the blood spreading in my spine. It didn't bother me that much. I was very sleepy, I was twilight sedated, but it was something that I did feel. I also had to feel the sensation of the pressure rising in my head. I had to feel the sensation of some tingling and stuff in my feet as that blood was kind of crushing and spreading within my spinal column. I was the one who called it when it was time to stop adding blood. The point of that blood patch was to get as much blood in there as we could. So naturally there was a little bit of discomfort there for me as the patient. On the flip side, when we went in with the fibrin glue, not only was it a targeted patch, it was also much less volume because it was the glue instead of the blood. When it came to the blood patch, each needle introduced 10 to 15 milliliters of my own blood. When it came to the fibrin patch, it was only about 2 to 4 milliliters, and it was of an outside material. That meant a lot more comfort during the procedure as the material was going in, and I also didn't have to literally feel it when it was the fibrin glue going in. The fibrin glue also dries faster, so the healing time, the flat time that I had to wait after the procedure, was lessened on the patch when I did the fibrin glue instead of the blood. After a blood patch, I had to stay flat for 2 hours for monitoring. After the fibrin patch, I only had to stay flat for 1. In both of those cases, I then went home for my more extended flat time, but at least then I didn't need to get monitored at the hospital anymore. The fibrin patch hurting less didn't stop there. After the blood patch, when all of the pain meds wore off, I had huge, crazy nerve burning, basically from my rib cage down. Everywhere where there was blood in my back, I had radiating pain going down my sides and down my legs. After the fibrin patch, I had no such thing. And my fibrin patch was healing from not just the patch itself, but also the 2 milligrams from that morning and from the day before. So I was healing from 3 procedures, and I had a much easier healing time. And I think that totally makes sense, given what happened, right? When it was high volume and a ton of blood and it was my whole back, everything got mad, everything was inflamed. When it was just a targeted spot and it was just the fibrin glue and it wasn't spreading to so many levels, my back didn't get so mad and my nerves weren't so mad. So I really liked that on that fibrin patch, I didn't have to feel it during the procedure and I didn't really have to feel it much after. I did have back pain, back soreness from the needles, but that's to be expected. That's no biggie. Let's talk about risks. Most of the biggest risks between the 2 procedures are the same. Things like infection. Very, very rarely there can be some nerve damage stuff because you've got needles near all of your spinal cord things. But there are 2 big risk differences that are noted in most of the forums that I see for this. But I can't stress enough that all of these risks are super, super minimal. The first one is iron toxicity. There's iron in your blood and it's not supposed to go into your brain fluid. But if you inject blood outside of a sac where there's a hole to your brain fluid, you can occasionally get iron toxicity from blood entering into your brain fluid. Again, exceedingly rare. And also, that could happen just from having a leak in there. There are risks to just leaving your leak there. You have to keep that in mind too. On the flip side, difference number 2 is arachnoiditis, which is a bigger risk for the fibrin glue patch. And I said that really confidently, like I know how to pronounce it, but I don't. Apparently, since the glue is stickier, you have a higher risk of sticky things happening that you didn't want to happen, like nerves getting stuck to veins or to each other, so that when you twist and stuff, it's causing more tearing and problems, or along those lines, I'm not gonna look into it. It's not gonna happen to me. It's fine. But each has their slightly higher risk. When you go in with the Fibrin Glue product, that is also a mix of stuff from other patients, and it's other patients' blood product that goes together into this Fibrin Glue. So if that weirds you out, that's a thing to consider. And the flip side of that is when they take your own blood, that's another poke for you to endure. That is another time that you will need to get stuck. They need to draw your blood in order to put it into your back. And for me, they had to do it a couple of times last time because this one wasn't quite drawing right, so then we had to do an arterial line. There are, of course, very small risks involved with doing that stuff too. Please give this video a thumbs up and share it if it is helpful. That really does help my channel. Thank you. Ultimately, when it comes to choosing between the two materials, like I said at the beginning, that's on you. There's definitely a time and a place for each one to come into play, but that's something that only you and your doctor can decide. Keep in mind that my situation is different from yours, no matter how similar we sound. Your doctor may choose something different for you. Your risk tolerance might be different from mine. One of our doctors or one of us might have been exposed to a different study than the other person's doctor. And so that could totally change your path of action. So how do you choose? Well, to me, I ultimately saw the decision as up to my doctor. Within my limits of comfort, I want him to choose the best option. I might like the experience of fibrin patching better, but if I'm open to either one and my doctor feels strongly that the blood patch would be better for me, then I'm ultimately going to go with his decision. But like I said, that's only as long as I'm open to either. I don't know if I told you guys this story, but I actually was not open to fibrin patching in the beginning because I hadn't looked into it yet. So when I went in for my first blood patch, I didn't know that fibrin was on the table and I hadn't looked into it at all. So I told my doctor that if they were not able to draw blood in the operating room, then I wanted them to just call off the procedure. Don't inject the Fibrin Glue instead. That's not going to be our backup plan. We're not going to have a backup plan. It's going to be blood or bust. Because I figure once I inject that glue, I can't uninject it, but I can always make the decision to inject it later. Everything ended up fine, and we did end up getting to draw blood for me, but that's an example of within my comfort, I want my doctor to make the decision. Now, I would make a different decision. Now I would say, if you're not able to pull blood, go ahead and do the Fibrin Glue. But back then, it was out of my realm of comfort, so that was not on the table for us. It's a delicate dance between the doctor and the patient. You need to think about yourself and your own feeling, your own risks. You don't have to do things just because everybody else thinks that it's no big deal. Just trust your gut and don't be afraid to change your mind, and make sure that you are with a doctor that you trust. Next for me on my CSF leak journey, we're going in for some targeted fibrin patching. I'm actually flying out tomorrow and I will be on the table the next day. This will be my third patch. I'm not feeling very nervous. I'm just a little bit jittery to get it over with. I want to go, get it done, and be home and just be recovering because I'm kind of done with being on the table. But I'm so excited that this time we're going based on the results of my CT myelogram, so it's gonna be targeted and it's gonna be fibrin, so hopefully it'll be an easy recovery period again. Wish me luck, cross your fingers, pray. I'm so excited. Let's fix this leak.